The quilt that is behind me is the one that's on my bed, which I sleep beneath each night. And my new book, Quilting with Liberty Fabrics, may not have ever existed if it wasn't for this quilt. So I'm going to tell you the story of it now. I've collected Liberty fabrics since I was about 8 years old, and my nan used to take me to the mill shop. But it was really when I had my daughter Edie in 2007 that I started buying Liberty fabrics to make her sweet outfits to wear. And then following on from that, I got much more interested in what the design studio were doing and the stories that were coming out about the Liberty fabrics. Went to a few exhibitions and just gradually started to buy a little bit more and build up my stash. Fast forward a few years and I'm helping out my friend Andy, who owns the 108 Gallery in Harrogate and puts on some incredible shows. And one of the shows he did was the drawings of the musician Edwin Collins. Edwin Collins had a double brain hemorrhage which left him in a very critical state, and they didn't think he would make any recovery, but he did. And in the early days in hospital, there were very few things that he could say and articulate, but one of the things that he could say were, "The possibilities are endless." Edwin, as a boy, used to love ornithology and drawing birds, and what he did as part of his recovery, which became known as a bird a day keeps the doctors away, is to start drawing pictures of birds with his left hand, because his right hand he could no longer use. And the exhibition that we were working on was showing these pencil drawings of the birds. And I spent time studying them. I spent time, met Edwin and his wife Grace, who wrote this book as well, that's about the restoration of Edwin Collins. And you know, she was an incredible person, and their relationship and you know how their marriage and their lives changed dramatically. So spending time with them and looking at the work, it was just one of those moments and experiences in life that you really remember. And as I was helping out, I really fell in love with one of the drawings, the pencil drawings, which was of a puffin. And I saved up and I bought it. And then something that happened next was maybe fate or something, I don't know. But as I was saying, I was hooked on Liberty fabrics, and the seasonal collections would come out. And what they did was they actually collaborated with Edwin Collins, and the drawings of the birds that he had made were put onto a fabric called ornithology and printed on Tana lawn. So you can imagine I was quite excited when I saw that, and obviously a quilt had to be made. The fabric came out in the spring of 2012 when I was very heavily pregnant with my third child, Ellis, and I went away for a weekend with a couple of my friends by the sea in Whitby and put all these fabrics into a bag. So I had my Liberty print, and then I actually got some IKEA fabric and some plain greys but with a little bit of texture in. I think I cut up an old duvet for some of the pieces as well, and I spent the weekend in the upstairs bedroom of this tiny little house that we rented, just cutting big pieces of fabric and putting together a kind of brick style quilt. I travelled home with the quilt top all pieced together, and then I also remember not being patient enough one day for my husband or somebody to come home and help me to baste the quilt, so I just was crawling around on the floor with this giant baby in my tummy. I somehow had this in my head, I think, knowing that I was then going to have another baby to look after, that this quilt, it was kind of now or never, and I had this real feeling that I wanted to get it done, and I wanted a quilt for me and my husband, something for us. I'd made quilts for lots of other people but not really for us before, so it got basted. I did some big stitching. I didn't want to break into the pattern too much, so it's quilted very, very simply with different weights of thread, and then it was kind of finished, and then I had another idea. When I got married, my wedding dress wasn't particularly fancy. I tried it on, got it off a sale rail, tried it on in the ladies' toilet and bought it. So it had a top layer of organza which had a few flowers printed onto it, which is why I'd really fallen for it, with some beads as well. And on my actual wedding night, I remember it was quite raucous, and at one point I was dancing with one of Paul's friends, and I heard this kind of, a bit like a kind of when you ladder a pair of tights, and I looked down and there was like a bit of a hole appeared in the layer of organza, and by the end of the night there were several of them. I remember, you know, kind of saying to people, oh well, you know, hopefully I'll never need to wear it again, and kind of putting my hand through one of the holes and things. So my wedding dress, we put it in the washing machine I think afterwards, and it ended up in the dressing up box, or, you know, it just kept moving around. I kind of couldn't throw it away, but again I was like, you know, what am I going to do with this dress? It's had its day. So when I'd finished this quilt, knowing it was for our bed, and the stories behind the fabric and love, and, you know, all these kind of the messages from Edwin's drawings and the book and everything were all in my head, I thought, well, maybe I should just put a bit of my wedding dress into this quilt as well. So I took some of these organza flowers, fused them onto the top of the quilt and stitched them in place. And from then on, we have slept beneath it every night. You know, we've nursed our kids beneath that quilt. I've had good times and bad times. Like, you know, these objects do soak up the experiences of your life. And if my house was burning down, you know, this is one of the things. Obviously, I'd want my family to be safe, but this for me is something that I've made, you know, from my heart, and that I care about, and that does tell a story. And that was the thing. What I realised, particularly with Liberty Fabrics, because they were working, the design studio were working with all these incredible people, you know, doing all these amazing drawings, and that they had the archive, was that you can tell stories in quilts with Liberty Fabrics. And I can't think of any other fabric company that can compare to Liberty in that sense. And I think if I hadn't made this quilt, I wouldn't have had the idea for the book, which isn't just a quilting book. It is a book where every single one of those quilt projects tells you a story about Liberty's amazing heritage and history from 1875 to the current day. So that's been a really exciting journey, and I really hope that when people read the book, they take note of that and get some of those ideas to make their own stories and make quilts that have a personal significance to them.